Good morning, good afternoon, and or good evening to every viewer. My name is Bankerdakur Chynne. I am from Meghalaya, currently pursuing my master's in microbiology at Central University of Tamil Nadu. So for today's presentation, I'll be talking about the primary, secondary, and the tertiary treatment of the wastewater. This topic is not only essential for a microbiological perspective, but also for an environmental and public point of view, because water is one of the most critical needs for human survival. So these are the contents for today's presentation. In today's presentation, I'll basically be talking about the introduction, like what is wastewater, what are the different sources of wastewater and their constituents, the purpose of wastewater treatment, and the two techniques of wastewater treatment, that is the preliminary and the primary treatment of the wastewater. So, what is wastewater? Wastewater is basically the water that has already been used in our daily life, whether it's household, agriculture, or industries. And once used, this water it doesn't stay clean anymore. Its physical, chemical, or and its biological characteristic changes, making it unsuitable for direct use or discharge. Why is this a problem? Wastewater has become a problem because it carries with itself a mixture of impurities such as the suspended solid, the organic matter, the pathogens, and sometimes the toxic chemicals, which can spread diseases, degrade our ecosystem, and pollute the natural water bodies. However, it should be noted that wastewater is not completely useless. If managed or treated properly, this wastewater can actually become a reusable resource again. So, what are the different sources of wastewater? There are four common sources of wastewater. The domestic or municipal wastewater. This include the wastewater which comes from our home daily, that is from our cooking, cleaning, and other stuff. It also include the water which comes from our schools, hospitals, restaurants, shopping malls, etc. The second source is the industrial wastewater. This includes the wastewater which comes from industries. And as you know, different industries they releases different types of contaminants based on their processing techniques. For example, pharmaceutical industries they can release a large amount of chemical residues into our water body, while poultry or the food processing industries they can release a large amount of organic matter and fats into waste into the water bodies. Infiltration and inflow. This include the water that enters into our sewage system unintentionally, that is from leaking pipes, groundwater infiltration, etc. Stormwater, rainfall runoff or snow melt. So when rainwater flows over the roads, rooftops, or even the open grounds, they pick up with themselves the dirt, oil, and other pollutants that can contaminate our water bodies. So let's talk about the constituents of wastewater. Uh, the different source of wastewater have different constituent. For example, in our municipal wastewater, we are expected to find the particulate materials such as the rag, silk, paper, food waste, etc. that makes our water dirty. We are also expected to find the biodegradable organic matter composed of the proteins, carbohydrates, and the lipids, the- which are easily broken down by the microbes. And in doing so, the microbes they will consume a large amount of dissolved oxygen, which increases the biological oxygen demand uh, and causing a further harm to our aquatic life. Disease causing microorganisms such as bacteria, protozoa, and viruses can also be found in the municipal wastewater, which will lead to an outbreak of diseases like cholera, typhoid, or dysentery. Nitrogen and phosphorus, which are very essential for the growth of plants or the microbe, can also be found in water in very excess amount, leading you to eutrophication or the algal growth in water bodies. Lastly, we can find the endocrine disrupting compounds. These compounds they are actually found in a very small amount in these water bodies. However, though present in small amount, they can interfere with the hormonal system in the humans and the animal and the wildlife. Now let's talk about the consequence of the industrial wastewater. Industrial wastewater they have the same contaminants as the municipal wastewater. Other than that, they will contain the heavy metals such as the arsenic, cadmium, chromium, or lead, which are very toxic to human life. Refractory compounds can also be found in the industrial water. By refractory compounds, I mean those compounds which resist natural degradation and they stay for a longer period of time in the water bodies. Other chemical pollutants include phenols, ammonium, and the chemical oxygen demanding generating substances. The third, now let's talk about the storm water constituent. Silk and suspended particles from the soil erosion, the petroleum compounds from the vehicles runoff, the pesticides or the fertilizers from the agricultural lands. Now let's talk about the purpose or why wastewater treatment is important. Wastewater treatment is important because it removes pathogens like the bacteria and viruses, preventing the outbreaks of waterborne diseases like typhoid, cholera, and dysentery. The second purpose is to minimize the organic or the inorganic pollutants because these pollutants they will try to consume the water's dissolved oxygen, increasing the biological oxygen demand that further harms the aquatic life. Third is the simple purpose that is to remove the suspended solid toxic metals and chemicals from the water bodies. Lastly is to enable the treated wastewater to be reused for irrigation in industrial processes and groundwater discharge. Now let's talk about the process of wastewater treatment. There are four processes of wastewater treatment: the preliminary treatment, the primary treatment, the secondary or the biological treatment, the tertiary and or the advanced treatment. However, in this video, I'll be more focused only on the primary treatment, the preliminary and the primary treatment of the wastewater. So what is the preliminary treatment of wastewater? The preliminary treatment of wastewater is the first and foremost step of wastewater treatment that removes the large debris and the floating materials like the sticks, rags, and the plastics. Preliminary treatment is also able to remove the tiny but heavier particles such as the sand, gravel, coffee ground, and the eggshells. Removing these material at the very start of the wastewater treatment helps to prevent the blockage of the pipes, ensuring that there is a continuous flow of the wastewater into the other treatment processes. And it also prevents the costly repairs or maintenance of the mechanical parts. However, it should be noted that the preliminary treatment is only capable of removing the physical obstacles and not the dissolved organics, nutrients, or the pathogens. This, the techniques applied for the preliminary treatment of wastewater include the screening, the grid removal, and skimming, uh, which I'll be discussing in details. So, what is screening? So, what is screening? Screening is a process in which what is screening? So, screening is the process of preliminary, is the first step of the preliminary treatment where the large coarse solids from the incoming wastewater are removed. Uh, Wastewater is passed through a screen, and depending on the size of the solids to be removed, there are two types of screen: the coarse screen and the fine screen. Now let's talk about the coarse screen first. The coarse screens are those screens which are designed to remove the large debris like the leaf, sticks, rags, boards, plastics, etc. These screens, they are made up of steel bars aligned. They are made up of these steel bars aligned perpendicularly to the flow of water, and they have an opening of half to 1 inch. To better understand how this sports screen works, I'll try to play this video for you. So as you can see in this video, the wastewater, they will pass easily through the screen, but these large particles, for example, the bicycle which is shown in this video, it will get trapped. It will get trapped outside of the screen. To remove the screen, these racks, they will move between the bars, lifting the debris and then depositing the debris or this cycle and depositing it into another container for disposal. Now that the core screen is done, I'll talk about the fine screen. The fine screen, they also have the same working principle as the core screen, but these screen, they are designed to remove the smaller particles like the food particles, the paper fragment, and the plastic pieces, etc. These screens, they have an opening ranging from 1 inch to half inches. So in this video, you can see how the wastewater, they can pass easily through the screen, but but these tiny but these tiny particles, they get trapped by the screen. uh, these fine screen then uses moving belts to transport these captured fine solid into another container for disposal. Now let's talk about the second process of the preliminary treatment, which is the grit removal. So what are grits? The grit, they refers to those heavy solid they refers to those heavy solid materials found in the wastewater. These materials, they are of sizes 0.2 millimeter, and they include the sand, gravel, they include the sand, gravel, the coffee ground, the eggshells. These solids, they have a specific gravity, and they have a specific gravity and they settle. Okay. So where was I? Okay. So these particles, they have a higher specific gravity, and they can settle quickly to the bottom of the tank when the flow of the water slows down. To When the flow of the water slows down. So to remove this grit, the wastewater is passed grit through these grit chambers. Is passed through these grit chambers. Uh, these are the tanks designed designed in such a way so that the velocity of the water is reduced to zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.5 meter per second. At this reduced speed, the heavy particles like the sand particles as shown in this video, they will settle down to the bottom of the tanks, while this organic matter, they will float in the water and move further for the biological treatment or the primary treatment. Once settled, the grit is then removed using these scrapers, which move at the bottom and pushes this grit into another container for further disposal. Now let's talk about the last process of the preliminary treatment of wastewater, which is the skimming. Skimming is a process of removal of the light materials that float to the surface of the wastewater. These include the oils, grease, fats, waxes, soaps, scums, and other floating debris. So, how does skimming work? The wastewater from the wastewater from the grid removal, it is passed into the skimming tanks where the water is allowed to settle for some time, that is for 15 to 60 minutes. 15 to 60 minutes. During this time, the oils or the grease, they will float to the surface of the they will float to the they will float to the surface of the water, forming a layer, while the forming a layer. Okay, while the water beneath this remains free from oils and grease. The da, da, da. Hmm. The mechanical pumps then remove the, the, the water beneath this layer into another tank for further treatment, while the mechanical scrapers or the pump, they they pump up or remove this layer of oil or grease for disposal. Yeah. Now let's talk about the primary treatment of wastewater. Now let's talk about the primary treatment of the wastewater. After the preliminary treatment of wastewater, the primary treatment of wastewater is designed to remove the finer suspended particles that are too fine to be removed during screening, or the settleable solids which form a sludge at the bottom of the tank. The main objective of this primary treatment of wastewater is to also reduce the biological oxygen demand by 25 to 40%. That is, the primary treatment of wastewater is capable of removing basically a few percentage of the organic matter that consumes the dissolved oxygen. However, it doesn't remove the dissolved pollutants, nutrients, or the toxic chemicals. Uh, the different techniques for the primary treatment of wastewater includes the sedimentation, coagulation, and flocculation. So, what is sedimentation? Sedimentation is all about letting the suspended is all about letting the suspended solids settle to the bottom of the tank under the force of gravity. So how does this work? The water from the uh, skimming process is the water from the So let's talk about how does sedimentation work. So in sedimentation, the wastewater from the preliminary treatment is left undisturbed for 2 to 3 hours in these sedimentation tanks, in these very large sedimentation tanks. During this time period, the heavy particles like the fecal particles, the food residue, the paper fibers, they will settle down to the bottom of the sedimentation tanks, forming this thick, dark color sludge. And how can we remove this sludge? To remove this sludge, we have these rotating scrapers which move slowly along the bottom, pushing the settled sludge along with it into a collection hopper, which as shown in this video. This one. So sedimentation, it is capable of removing 50 to 70% of the suspended solid and reduces the 25 to 40% of the biological oxygen demand. Okay, now let's talk about the coagulation process. After sedimentation process, most of the large and dense particles have settled out. However, there will still be the tiny particles that will be suspended in the wastewater. These tiny particles are often of colloidal sizes, that is 1 nanometer to 1 micrometer. These particles, they also carry a negative charge around them, which makes it hard for these particles to clump with each other and form a heavier particle. That is where the coagulation process comes into play. The main purpose of this coagulation process is to destabilize the charges that these tiny particles carry on their surfaces. How can we destabilize this charge? To destabilize this charge, we need to add the chemicals called the coagulants like alum, ferric, or the calcium chloride into the water. Into the water. Once these coagulants are added into the water is subjected to a rapid mixing at 700 to 1000 rpm for 30 to 20 seconds. Uh, this rapid mixing will ensure that these tiny particles, they will collide with each other and form heavier a heavier particle called the microflux. However, it should be noted that during this coagulation process, these microflux are still not heavy enough to settle down to the bottom of the stack. So, to make these microflux settle down to the bottom of the stack, a process called as the flocculation is carried out. So, what is flocculation? The main purpose of this flocculation is to aggregate the fine destabilized microflux that were formed during the coagulation process into the larger clumps called the macroflux. The first step of the flocculation process is the addition of the chemicals called the flocculants, such as the polyacrylamide, guar gum, or activated silica. When these flocculants are added into the okay, after this flocculant are added into the water is subjected to a gentle mixing, that is 20 to 40 rpm for 15 to 30 minutes. This gentle mixing will allow the microflux to bump into each other and further form a bigger and heavier complex called the macroflux that is capable of settling down to the bottom of the tank by itself, and then further removed by the primary sludge. The clarified water is then sent for further treatment. So this step of flocculation is crucial, because without flocculation, many tiny particles will still remain suspended in the water, making the water cloudy and harder for the biological treatment. So I've reached to the end of my presentation. Here are the book references for today's presentation and the video references for today's presentation. Hmm. Thank you. I hope that you guys have understood this topic clearly.